Hi, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study. Excuse me. A plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Luke's Gospel, chapter 22, and we are continuing on the journey of the night Jesus was arrested, crucified, well, you can say tried, crucified, buried, and then his resurrection. And Luke has given us some details, very interesting details. Some of the other gospels don't didn't reveal, and so that's why it's interesting. It's always good. Let me put it this way: it's always good to study all of Scripture, and very interesting details. So it's good to study all of Scripture so that you can get the full view. So, all right. So let's jump right into it. Luke chapter 22. Let's see. What did I say off? I think we left off where Jesus is arrested in verse number 47. Beginning, he's arrested. Again, it's a very interesting story. After he is praying, and then he comes to his disciples and says to them, you couldn't stay awake with me 1 hour. And then, as I said before, Peter is missing an opportunity as well as all of them. If you remember, during the supper, Jesus said that all of them were going to flee. I mean, although the focus will be on Peter, but all of them fled. Okay, all of them fled. We may see this in a moment. So, but even this moment here, as Judas leads them to Jesus, he knows he leads them to Jesus. He knows where Jesus, that the Garden of Gethsemane was one of Jesus' spots. And this was the perfect place to arrest him away from the crowd. And then, but an interesting thing happened in verse 51 when he says that, no, not verse 51. I'm going to pick it up in verse 54. Now, he says, they seized him and led him away. No, that's not what I wanted. It was one back up here. And verse 50 is what I want. He says, then one of them struck the high priest's ear. Then one of them struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. But Jesus responded, no more of this, and touching his ear, he healed them. Now, what's interesting about this, here are evil men coming to arrest a good man. So if you are the authorities, nothing as far as if you were to investigate, would lead you to believe that Jesus was a guilty man. The Pharisees lie, and they will continue to lie. And even with all that, no one will believe it. But on top of that, when they come to arrest him, Peter slices off his ear, the servant's ear. Jesus heals them. Now, just kind of think about that. He slices them off, and you can see the dude probably, I can hear, right? He slices his ear off, I can hear. His heel, his back, I was just thinking that moment right here. Why didn't people go, wait a minute now, whoa, what did we just see? But Jesus says here, In verse 53, every day I was with you in the temple complex, and you never laid a hand on me. But this is your hour and the dominion of darkness. Okay, the dominion of darkness. So this is, and in John's gospel, uh, towards the end, John would make the commentary that they attempted to arrest him, but his hour has not yet come. So now we're looking at this is the hour of darkness. And a lot more could be said. We could even go further with this. We're not, but we could go further with this about really just how much power Satan has versus how much power God allows him to have. I just kind of let that thought kind of stir around. All right, verse 54 says they seized him and led him away and brought him into the high priest's house. Now, this Jesus will actually have two, I'm going to call them kangaroo courts, and then he will be led to Pilate. The Jews, and kind of shows you where they were in their life, that they could not execute someone. So what they're doing with these first two, you can say, hearings, kangaroo trials, it's kind of getting their lie together. Okay, so but here back to Peter, right? Now, remember Peter just, I want to say arrogantly, boldly said that he would never deny Jesus. Now, it didn't say it here, but in another gospel, he said, even if talking about all the disciples, everybody, if they do it, I would never do that. Well, here's Jesus. Here's Peter now. It says, meanwhile, Peter was following at a distance. They lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard. Now, they had brought Jesus into the temple complex. And really, what we're getting ready to find out is that Jesus is sitting there in the temple complex, ready to be brought into the high priest. Okay? But in the meantime, notice this. They lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, and Peter sat among them. We also know that John had kind of had the hookup and was allowed to bring Peter in. Okay? He got Peter brought in. Verse 56, when the servant saw him sitting in the firelight and looked closely at him, he said, this man was with them too. But he denied. Now remember, Jesus said this is the hour of darkness, and you can see how it's hitting Peter as well. But Peter denied it. Woman, I don't know him. After a little while, someone else saw him and said, you were one of them too. Man, I am not, Peter said. About an hour later, another kept insisting, this man certainly was with them, since he is also a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. Immediately while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. Now get this in verse 61. Then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. So Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. Like, wow, right? So, we get some fascinating details here. Remember, Peter was, this reminds me of, I always heard about Adam and Eve, and that the picture that I always kind of got, the way people would tell it, was that maybe Eve was caught there by staring at the tree, and then the serpent slithered up next to Eve and deceived her, and then she skipped off somewhere and gave fruit to Adam to eat. The reality, Adam was standing right there all along. That kind of brings me to mind. Then you have right here, Jesus is sitting literally in ear distance, right? He's sitting right there. He's sitting there, and he's hearing Peter deny him. And Peter's actually, he's right there in front of the Lord. He's denying him. He's really denying the Lord to his face. And that third time, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Wow, what a look, right? What a look. What a look. I mean, just wow, what a look. History, or what's called Christian tradition. Now, the scriptures doesn't say that, but we don't really have, when we're talking about Christian history for the first century, we don't have any really historical history beyond the scriptures here. And we have some stories, and they're not always, whether you cannot say that they are confirmed or not. So we also say that, so this is why we preface this by saying tradition says Peter never forgave himself. To the point that when it is believed that he is crucified, and that too is by Christian tradition, when he was crucified, when he was executed, I should say, and he begged to be crucified upside down. And this is a story that you hear, that he was crucified upside down. And the reason why, because he said he did not feel worthy. He did not feel worthy to be crucified as the Lord was. And I certainly can understand the guilt that he can never, ever, ever, ever get over, the guilt of denying Jesus to his face. And the only thing that you could probably say is we do see later on that he certainly rests in the Lord's mercy, because he did go on to be one of the, obviously, one of the greatest leaders of the early church. Now, verse 63 says, the men who were holding Jesus started mocking and beating him. After blindfolding him, they kept asking, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they were saying many other blasphemous things against him. So now you see, kind of get the picture of what's kind of going on with Jesus when he was arrested. And there was, you can almost, well, what stops, there was a little different from, let's say, arrest today and then rest during this time. That when we talk about right, those rights were only reserved for Roman citizens. Now, if you were arrested, that they didn't really apply to you. So notice Jesus, the guards, and these would be the temple guards, mocking Jesus, beating him. And I emphasize the temple guard because these should have been Jewish people serving the law. So you kind of get the religious atmosphere there. When daylight came, the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, convened and brought him before the Sanhedrin. Now, again, he doesn't say this, but they had already had one trial. So he says, and the Sanhedrin was the body of elders. It is believed to be somewhere around 70, and they included both Pharisees and Sadducees and other groups. So they were kind of the body of elders, a group of elders. So then here's the question. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." Now, of course, this was a baiting question. The reason why they were asking that, even though they could have answered the question themselves. And here's the interesting thing about the Pharisees. The Pharisees, their sin of unbelief wasn't that they were confused. In other words, their unbelief, it wasn't that they were confused. They knew who Jesus is. They could have taught. They could have shown from the scriptures who Jesus is. And here's the interesting thing about their sin. They knew who he was, but just rejected him. In other words, we know who you are, Jesus. We're rejecting you. And you can put that on the same level as Satan. That Satan who, in the face of God, whatever that time period in eternity past, when he rebelled against God, Satan did so in full light of God. Deceived, no doubt, deluded, but it was a in-the-face rejection. And this is the kind of sin that you see with the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. So they're asking him. Oh, let me also say this. Now, this is kind of in general because not all of the Sanhedrins felt this way. Because keep this in mind. Joseph, I think of Arimathea, and I think he was a Pharisee. I may be wrong in that, but certainly Nicodemus is also present. Okay, Nicodemus is present. Okay, so he asks the question, "Are you the Messiah?" They're asking this because they need a solid reason. Because the one thing that Rome did not tolerate was insurrection. They were tolerant to people. They were tolerant to cultures that they would conquer. They were certainly tolerant to Israel and let them keep their culture, but you had to fall in line with Rome. And they always had problems with insurrections. So the one thing they didn't tolerate is if a person said, "I'm king," that would be, and this is what they're trying to bait Jesus into. But he said to them, "If I do tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated on the right hand of the power of God." Now notice that question right there, right? Notice that question. So it's not blasphemous, one. It's not even against Roman law. All right. So he says, they all ask, "Are you then the Son of God?" And by the way, that statement itself is not against the law. And he said to them, "You say that I am." Now, this was kind of a sly way of saying, "Yes, I am, but you said that I am." And then they was like, "Why do we need any more testimony?" They said, "Since we have heard it ourselves from his mouth." Well, what did you hear from his mouth? And this kind of shows how desperate they were. What exactly did Jesus say? And so anyway, we'll pick this up and we're going to head on to Pilate because now they have to take him to Pilate for execution to get the verdict. And all along, by the way, it's kind of interesting. In the other Gospels, we see they kept hammering Jesus, and it was like they just kind of drew any kind of anything to try to make it stick. And even Pilate is going to say, "Why are you bringing this guy here?" And Pilate is going to continue to say, I'm not finding any evidence for guilt, which would be the sin even more. I'm not finding anything. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. As always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you in the next study.